All right, we're going to go on a record on Mark D. Jensen. It's 22, I should say 2002 CF314. Let's have the appearances, please.
The state appears by Carly McNeil and Public Service Special Prosecutor Beverly Jamboys.
Attorneys Bridget Krause, Jeremy Perry, and Mackenzie Renner appear on behalf of Mr. Mark Jensen, who appears in person. Good morning, Judge.
Good morning. We're in compliance with victim notification from the state?
Yes.
All right. And then we'll do some housekeeping matters. I do have the pre-sentence report. Has the pre-sentence report been reviewed with the defendant?
It has.
Any corrections for the record?
Yes, Judge. On page 8.
All right, let me get there. I'm there.
Under the, just trying to find exactly where. He's been held in custody since July 30th of 2007. He was actually formally, it says he was formally arrested on July 30th, 2007. He was actually formally arrested on March 20th, 2002, and then bail was increased on July 30th, 2007.
All right, those are corrected for the record then. Any other corrections?
No other corrections specifically as to the PSI.
All right, and then I will note for the record, we have an individual on the phone who's also going to hear the hearing. Douglas Jensen, this is a judge. Can you hear us?
Yes.
All right, he said yes. The other thing I want to do before we proceed is indicate on the record all the documents that have been filed, and I'll ask the state if they had a chance to review them. First of all, there's a written statement by Mark Jensen with some pictures attached. There is a letter from David M. Jensen. There's a letter from Lori Costner. There's a letter from Dan and Forrest Jensen. And finally, there's a letter from Douglas Jensen. Has the prosecution had a chance to review all those documents?
Yes, I believe there's a letter from David with the defense grouping of letters, and then the state had submitted the letter from Douglas.
All right, thank you. Okay, so we're going to proceed to sentencing. The state didn't make their remarks. There's going to be any victim statements?
Yes, there are. 3 of Julie's brothers are present, and they wish to address the court.
Let's start out with that so they can have come up and make their statements.
Come up to the microphone. Yep, you can have a seat. And then you just speak into the microphone and say your name.
All right, can you get the microphone near him? And try to get it as close as you can, sir. All right, your first and last name for the reporter?
Lawrence Griffin.
All right, and what is your relationship to this case?
I am Julie Jensen's brother.
All right, go ahead, sir.
Your Honor, Julie Jensen, nee Griffin, was the only daughter among 5 children. I am Larry, the oldest brother. Julie was 7 years younger than me and was followed by brothers Michael, Paul, and Patrick. I, along with my brothers, grieve our sister's loss. Mark Jensen's harassment of Julie for years, leading to his calculated murder of her on December 3rd, 98, put a shocking end to the kind and gentle person that Julie embodied. Julie's marriage to Mark in 84, the birth of David in 90, and of Douglas in 95 were ultimate joys to which Julie devoted her life. She cheerfully pursued the activities of raising family, demonstrating to everyone she met the love she felt for her role in life. The impact that Julie's loss has had upon her friends, her neighbors, and community has been that of a permanent void. The negative impact upon the Griffin family is that Julie no longer lives to celebrate family events and lifetime occasions. We've had no contact with Julie's sons, David and Douglas, as they were raised under the influence of the Jensen family. I feel that Mark Jensen's cruel and inhuman actions toward the life of Julie are unforgivable. I recommend he spend his life in prison without parole.
Thank you. All right, again, would you please state your name, sir?
Michael Griffin.
And what is your relationship to Julie Jensen?
I'm Julie's younger brother, 2 years her junior.
All right, go ahead, sir.
Dear Judge and members of the court, as one of Julie's 4 brothers, I'm 2 years her junior, I strongly appeal to you to sentence Mark Jensen to life without parole. The jury is out no longer applies, but how does one measure the loss of a life? The consequences of Mark Jensen's murder of our sister Julie are not only obvious, such as the fact her young sons, David and Douglas, lost their mother and her kind and loving care. Jensen's actions also reverberate through the lives of countless others. Julie suffered an unthinkably cruel death at the hand of Mark Jensen. Their sons, David and Douglas, our nephews, suffer the murder, deception, and intentional loss of their mother's loving goodness. The boy's father immediately worked to erase traces of their loving mother, creating an indescribably tragic void. Jensen's psychological cruelty to Julie was psychopathic, and in keeping his despicable method of murder, which he incredulously continues to deny. Mark Jensen killed Julie many times over, beginning years before he actually crystallized her organs and finally suffocated her in a pillow. We have grieved and missed our genuine and caring sister since her death at age 40 in 1998. Each of us and our families, an entire community of believers in Julie, have endured the displaced energy required by not only 1, but 2 long trials over the decades, both finding the same result of guilty. Mark Jensen knowingly chose to destroy our only sister, affecting all of us around her. He selfishly stole the goodness that was naturally Julie, and in doing so, robbed her own children, whom she loved and adored, and our family, and the entire world. Happiness is generally elusive in the wake of Julie's death. Our only satisfaction today is that Julie's good spirit is alive and well, and the truth is out, with and without the letter. In my last telephone conversation with Julie in the fall before her murder, I want everyone to know that even after years of Julie being psychologically tormented, and while suspecting that her own husband was suggestively planning her murder, and even as she was likely applying her considerable instinctive intelligence to the task of safely extracting herself and her beautiful children from threat, even then, Julie did not speak ill of Mark. And such was the nature of Julie's goodness, seeing the good in everyone. And this is what all of us, family and community members alike, have been robbed of. I again appeal for Mark Jensen to receive a maximum sentence of life without parole.
Thank you. All right, again, sir, your first and last name
My name is Paul Griffin.
and your relationship to Julie Jensen.
I'm Julie Jensen's brother.
All right, try to talk a little louder, sir, okay?
I'm Julie Jensen's brother.
Go ahead, sir.
Your Honor, I respectfully ask the court today to show no mercy for Mark Jensen. Why, you might ask? Because he showed no mercy to his wife, my sister, Julie Jensen. He treated her poorly by taking advantage of her kind, giving nature. He disrespected her as she took care of their house and children, while he did only what he pleased him while making her serve him. He showed no mercy while he routinely tortured and abused Julie mentally by recording her telephone calls and placing pornographic photos around the house year after year. He controlled her by keeping track of the miles on her car and expecting her to be home at all times when he called. When she tried to leave him, he threatened that she would never see her child again. He showed no mercy when he tried to poison her, not once, but twice in 1998, as the court saw. He showed no mercy to her children as he ignored their helpless pleas to bring their sick mother to the hospital. On December 3rd, he looked his boys in the eyes, knowing he was not going to allow them to see their mother again. Mark Jensen showed no mercy as Julie lay lying in bed, suffering through the stages of ethylene glycol poisoning, her respiratory system and major organs failing. When she was not dying fast enough, he showed no mercy as he sat on her back and shoved her face into a pillow. Mark Jensen hid behind a mask of fatherhood and providing for a family he cold-heartedly lied to and tore apart with his selfishness and disrespect for life. He murdered the person who made his adult life a success and gave him 2 wonderful boys. He had a chance to make things right, yet he chose evil, which he plotted and schemed for years and years until finally ending his sick game by killing our sister. Yet killing Julie was not enough for Mark Jensen physically. He further chose to spit on her grave by claiming she killed herself. He tried to erase her existence from the lives of her sons. He has continued for many years to make her children believe that she left them stranded. He showed no mercy in his claims that Julie's mother and family are depressed, suicidal people. Mark Jensen is a coward. He claimed Julie's letter was not admissible because she was not here to be confronted. Yet he continued to make false claims against her and our deceased mother. Mark Jensen does not deserve any opportunities for a second chance. I ask today for the court to give him the maximum sentence, no mercy. We've lived with this. I wrote this letter 15 years ago. Nothing has changed in that time. Julie died 25 years ago. We ask for peace.
Thank you. Is that the end of the victim statements?
It is.
Right. Anytime you're ready, Ms. McNeil, go ahead.
So unfortunately, Bob Jamboys is still a prosecutor in Portage County. So the only thing that could keep him away is the fact that he's in trial somewhere else. So I will be addressing the court this morning for sentencing. There's no need to rehash the trial. The court saw the evidence, 3 weeks of it. So I'm just going to focus on some pertinent parts here. Another thing that's important is I could never say anything about Julie better than her brothers just did. And so I want to focus on what the defendant did and the reality of what he did. We heard at trial about the brief affair that Julie Jensen had with Perry Tarika. And I think the normal reaction of someone when their partner has an affair is to be hurt, maybe to end the relationship, to be angry. That's a quite normal reaction. But it wasn't Mark Jensen who filed for divorce, it was Julie. He wanted the marriage to continue, and for 7 years after that point, he tormented Julie Jensen. Julie Jensen was told to keep a log of this harassment, and we saw at trial that it went on for pages and pages. The defendant would go to Julie and tell her that he'd found pornographic pictures on his vehicle at work. He would tell her about the receptionist at his job being cursed out. He would leave videotapes. One of the entries indicates that David found a videotape on the ledge of the garage. And then he claimed to receive a call at work asking how he liked the video. There was also another entry that these photos were left on a truck at Ruther during David's Christmas program. This was all to punish Julie for this affair, to torment her. And think about the reality of that, the time and the commitment to perpetrate this scheme for 7 years. 7 years of deceitful humiliation and cruelty. This is someone who had a life, he had a family, he had a home, he had hobbies like fishing, and yet he devoted his time to this torment. And it's something that he actually did, something similar, less so, but similar to his coworkers too. Using a fake email to harass one of his coworkers who was on a dating site. And clearly he did all these things with the idea that he was never going to get caught. Now, to most people, the idea of doing something like this is inconceivable, but the defendant not only thought it, he did it for 7 years. And it ends with Kelly. That's another reason why we know that the defendant was the perpetrator of this, because when Kelly came into his life, he had something else to do. And when he found a new woman, a woman who was going to commit to him and eventually marry him, when he found Julie Jensen's replacement, he decided not to do the thing that most people would do when they know their marriage is over. He decided to kill Julie Jensen. And we can see that as he's planning to sweep Kelly off her feet with a cruise, he's then going on the internet and looking for ways to murder his wife, starting with botulism and pipe bombs, those late, middle-of-the-night searches, his wife undoubtedly in the bedroom asleep during those hours. Think about the reality of that. To most people, doing that while your wife is in a room nearby is unimaginable, but not for Mark Jensen. And then he actually goes through with it. Actually poisoning someone, and she's dying in front of you. Most people would never even want to see their worst enemy die. Even a person who had done them wrong, someone who they could rightfully despise, a person couldn't endure watching someone else die. That is incomprehensible, but not for Mark Jensen. Julie Jensen was one of the people in the world that he was supposed to care for the most, and even if he emotionally didn't care for her, he should have felt regard for her as the mother of his children. But not only did he poison her, he watched her die, and we know this because of the searches on the computer. We saw those searches the evening before her death and into the night. Low blood pressure, skin turning blue, breathing rapid, unconsciousness. Those are the searches of someone watching another person die and hoping that it will be fast enough. And then when she wasn't dead, when he needed her to be, he killed her by his own hands. It's unbelievable to think about a person actually doing this, except we know that that's what Mark Jensen did. And I am sickened to see the defendant's letter to this court where he uses his kids as a reason to ask for parole. He didn't care about his kids enough to not murder their mother. And now they're a reason for parole. And not only did he kill the mother of his children and watch her die, but the kids saw it too. Nothing is more heartbreaking than hearing what David, as a child, said to the people like his teacher and his friend about his mother dying and begging his father for help and not getting it. Nothing's more heartbreaking than that, except for perhaps the letter the court has received from Douglas. He said that his mother was erased from his life. He said he learned more about his mother while listening to the trial than he had ever heard before. That is a terrible tragedy, and that's what the defendant did to his own kids. When the defendant murdered Julie Jensen, she was 40 years old. Today, she would be 65. The defendant stole 25 years of her life and counting. For that reason alone, the court should impose a life sentence without parole. But in imposing a sentence, I'm asking the court to consider how this case is different from many other homicides, not just due to the extraordinary facts, but also because a lot of homicides are sudden and impulsive acts of violence. That includes domestic violence homicides and shootings and robberies gone wrong. There might be some level of premeditation in murders like that, but very often we have a young person making an impulsively violent decision without a thought for the future. In a case like that, the passage of 25 years might matter. Maybe the 18-year-old who pulled the trigger is very different from a 40-something-year-old being sentenced after 25 years. But that's not the case here. This was not the heat of the moment, but it was a murder with the utmost premeditation. The things that are inconceivable, unimaginable, incomprehensible, and unbelievable to a regular person are things that Mark Jensen actually did here. Because he is a murderer without a conscience, and there's no fixing that. The court has the duty to protect the public from someone who murders a person that he's supposed to care about and watches her die, from someone who inflicts lifelong pain on his own children, from someone who has no morals to restrain him and who will commit any act of evil with the arrogance of thinking that he won't be caught. The defendant has stolen 25 years and counting from Julie's life. He stole her children away from her and her away from her children. He should not breathe the free air outside of a prison cell. And I am asking the court to impose a life sentence without parole. Thank you.
Thank you. Who's doing the defense argument? Go ahead.
Judge, I'm not going to reiterate the facts of this case. This court sat through 3.5 weeks of the trial and heard all the facts in the case. What I'm going to talk about in my sentencing argument is the character of Mr. Jensen, and then the court has to review the need to protect the public. When we talk about closure and peace, that's more than just shutting the door on Mr. Jensen and ensuring that he never gets out of custody. Closure is about healing. Julie Jensen's family and Mark Jensen's family are still hurting. You can hear that. You see that in the letters. You can hear that in the statements. The wounds are as fresh as they were 25 years ago. Today, the court has an opportunity to help this family heal. And healing could be considered, I'll just shut the door on him. I won't find him eligible for parole. He'll never walk the streets. He'll never have contact with the outside world. But will that be healing for the family? Not just Julie Jensen's brothers, but also the children. The 2 children that they had together, the 2 children that they love, the 2 children that Mr. Jensen continues to support and love and help in any way that he can. It is clear from Douglas's letter that he's angry, that he's hurt, that he's dealing with the death of his mother, that he's dealing with the fact that his father was found guilty of causing the death of his mother. And he doesn't want to have contact with Mr. Jensen at this point, and Mr. Jensen understands that. And he's willing to be there for Douglas if at any point he changes his mind and wants to talk to him or wants to be there with him. The court can see, and the court had an opportunity to hear during the trial, that Julie and Mark Jensen loved their children dearly. They spent all their time with them. When Mr. Jensen got home from work, he would spend the time outside with the boys. He'd go swimming, they'd go fishing, they'd build fishing rods. The family went hiking, the family went camping. This was a family that was very close to one another and were very loving of their children. When Julie Jensen died in 1998, the love Mark Jensen had for his children did not end. He continued to support them, Judge. In 1998, Mr. Jensen was the individual who provided that support to his children, and he didn't try to erase the memory of Julie Jensen. And although Douglas might not remember it because he was 3 when his mother passed away and didn't have all of the memories that maybe David had, Mr. Jensen put together a memory box for them, which included those bronzed booties that parents get for their children. It included letters, it included photos, and he had that memory box for each of his children to have. And they had that, and as Mr. Jensen knows, until 2007, when he was re-incarcerated and his bail was raised. They also had a memory wall of Julie Jensen that included a stairwell from upstairs to downstairs that had pictures of the boys with their mother. Again, that might not be something Douglas remembers because he was very young. But Mr. Jensen at no point wanted to erase the family pictures that they had or the memories of Julie Jensen. And if asked, he would provide any information the boys had of their mother. When Ms. Jensen was taken from the family, Mr. Jensen did what he could to try to support the boys in any ways that he can. He went to school conferences, he built fishing poles with David, he taught Douglas how to golf, and they went golfing together. These are the things that he tried to do to help his boys as they mourned the loss of their mother. Mr. Jensen never knew Douglas was afraid at home. The first time he read that is when he read Douglas's letter, and that's heartbreaking to him. He didn't want his son to have that fear. He wanted to be there for his son. He loved his son. He loves his son. And he would have talked to him if he had brought those concerns to him. As the court saw in the pictures that were sent to the court, Mr. Jensen maintained contact with his children all the way through his incarceration. That never stopped. He had phone calls with them. He did video visiting with them. They came in person to visit him. The court can see from the picture from 2019, the 3 boys with him. The blonde-haired boy is Douglas. The other 2 boys are Andrew and David. The court might remember David from when he testified. But he ensured that he maintained that contact with his children so that they would have some parent in their life who could guide them in the best way that he could while serving that time in prison. What Douglas might not also remember is that they would get balloons on Julie Jensen's birthday and release those in memory of her. These are the things Mark Jensen attempted to do so that his boys would know their mother and continue to celebrate her. After Mark Jensen was sentenced to prison, his boys were lost. They lost their mom, and then they lost their father to the Wisconsin state prison system. And during that time, Douglas found out that his boys were struggling. Mark found out that his boys were struggling and continued to try to provide guidance to them. As I said, there were prison visits, there were phone calls, there were messages, and that's something that Mr. Jensen wants to continue to have with his children if they want that. We also know from David's letter that he did feel supported by his father, and he was not afraid at his house. He was a little older when his mom left them in 1998. He would have been 8 years old, and he would have been 17 years old when Mr. Jensen went to prison. During that time, though, Mark found out that David was struggling in school. He was a peacemaker, and he tried to maintain peace in the family, and he just was not doing well. He was struggling at home, he was struggling at school, and all the school counselors tried to help him. They were not successful. So Mark Jensen worked to get him in to talk to a counselor so he could talk to someone he felt safe with. And as David's life continued and he continued to struggle, Mark continued to encourage him to seek out that counseling and seek out that help if he was needed. Same goes for Douglas. He continued to encourage Douglas to get the help that he needs. He knows that later in his life, he did struggle, he did connect with a church youth group, and that church youth group seemed to have a positive impact on Douglas's life. Andrew is the son that he did not have with Julie Jensen. He had that child with Kelly. And in 2009, after he was placed in prison, Kelly filed divorce papers. And after that, she tried to cut off contact between Andrew and Mark Jensen. Mr. Jensen wanted to have contact with his son. His son was only 4 when he went to prison. So he did file action in family court so that he could have those monthly phone calls with his son, because it was important for him to maintain that connection, important for him to give that guidance to Andrew, as he was without a father now, as his father was in prison. Mark Jensen is supportive of his children. He will continue to do so whether this court grants parole or not. He loves his boys and he wants to be there for them. When we look at whether the community will be harmed if Mark Jensen is released, we have to look at what Mr. Jensen did prior to 1998 and what he did after 1998. It is clear that if released, Mark Jensen will be a contributing member to the community. He will support himself. He's ambitious and industrious. We can see that from everything in the PSI and everything this court heard. He's always worked. In college, when he was at UW-Oshkosh, he started a painting company and employed other students to help him put himself through school and the other students to put themselves through school. He worked for Stifel Nicholas until 2002, and then he was kind of put on leave but still being paid in 2004 while this case was pending. And when he was fired from Stifel Nicholas, he didn't just throw his hands up and say, I'm not going to be able to do anything because I'm charged with a crime. He had boys to support. He had a family to support. So he started working, not in the stockbroker field because he couldn't. His license had been suspended. So what did he do? He went out and started a company. He put an ad in a newspaper. The ad in the newspaper was to do some construction work, and he got a job, even while this case was pending. And he started that remodeling job. He hired some other guys to help him with it, and he finished those jobs. And then he started his own company, which was Jensen Construction Group. He hired some other framers. He had 6 framing crews at one point in the Kenosha community, providing work to others. And they built houses throughout Kenosha. This continued until he was placed back in custody on July 30th, 2007 after the forfeiture hearing. So from 1998 until 2007, when we look at what Mark Jensen was doing, and we look as to whether he can support himself if released from custody and whether he's a danger to the community, the answer is no. He had no violations of the law. He followed the court order, which was that he had to check in with the DA's office 3 times a week, and then was reduced to 2 times a week at some point. He never missed an appointment. He checked in and signed in all of those times because that's what the court required of him. He started a company when he lost his job at Stifel Nicholas. He continued to work and provide employment to others so that they could support their families. He's been a contributing member, or he was a contributing member to the Kenosha and Racey community for years. He employed others. He was a member of the Rotary Club, which is a community service-based club. Prior to 1998, he had no contact with the criminal system, no contact with law enforcement unless it was they were called to the house for one reason or the other, which the court heard. That was the extent of the contact with law enforcement. This is not a man who has had any other negative contact with the system. This is a serious offense. That's absolutely true. He has been convicted of a serious offense. But when we look at the need to protect the public, after the time that Mr. Jensen has served in custody, we need not look to anything but those 8 years or 9 years that he was out pending the first trial in this case. And during that time, he was cooperative with the court, cooperative with the DA's office, cooperative with law enforcement. The court heard that anytime Detective Ratzberg wanted to speak to him, he came in. Anytime people had questions for him, he answered those questions. When they wanted to search the house, he said, go ahead. When they wanted papers, he provided them. When they wanted him to make a statement, he came into the police department to do so. When they wanted to talk to family members, he provided that information. He was cooperative throughout that process. And during the time waiting for trial, he was not only cooperative with the courts, he continued to provide work and continued to help others find employment in the community, in the Kenosha community. When we look at whether he can follow the rules, which is something that the court would look at if the court granted him parole and provided specific conditions that he had to find, what we need to look at is an institutional adjustment. It was positive, Judge. He spent the last 15 years in custody, and what did we see? 1 violation. one ticket that entire time, and it's because he had too much ibuprofen during the pandemic. In 2020, he's always worked in the kitchen since he's been at Dodge, the entire time, serving meals 3 times a day. That's the job he's had, and he's kept it the entire time. There's been no late, there's been no missing work, there's no arguments with correctional officers, no fight with other people in custody, no disrespect tickets, nothing. What he got was a ticket in 2020. And what happened during that time is they were pushing those large, heavy meal carts down a ramp in Dodge, and the people behind him lost control of their ramp, and it rammed into the back of Mr. Jensen. Broke a bone in his foot, cut up the back of both of his ankles, and broke a kneecap. So they provided him ibuprofen, and during that time, there wasn't a lot of contact with people. So what medical would do was provide an ibuprofen pack, and the CO would provide it to Mr. Jensen, and they advised him to take it as needed. And that's what he did. He took it as needed, and he would keep the rest of them in his room, and when they found out that he had the rest in his room, he got a ticket, and he had to have 16 days of room confinement. And what did he learn from that? If he had extra, give them back, and that's what he did. No other tickets then. He realized what the rule violation was, and when he got a new card from the CO, he would hand the other ibuprofen card back. That's the entire extent of any violations in the 15 years he spent in Dodge after being convicted in 2009. So when we look if this man can follow the rules of this court, if granted parole eligibility, the answer is yes. If we look to whether he can be a productive member of the community, the answer is yes. When we look as to whether the community has to be concerned if Mr. Jensen is released from custody, the answer is no. He spent time after being charged, and he followed all the rules of the court and did not have any negative contacts with law enforcement. We're asking the court to grant Mr. Jensen parole eligibility after 20 years. At that time, he'll be 68 years old. And as this court knows, parole eligibility isn't a given. It's a real-time assessment of whether Mr. Jensen is ready for parole. And some of the things that the parole board reviews for discretionary release, we know it's not automatic, is whether it would depreciate the seriousness of the offense, if there was a risk to the community, and whether there was a reasonably certainty of a crime-free reintegration of Mr. Jensen into society. And I've already addressed those. It is clear that this is a serious offense, and the time that he has served has been significant and will continue even if the court grants parole at 20 years. It is clear that he is not a continued risk to the community. He's had no violations except for that one medical one while serving his time in Dodge, and had no violations while he was out in our community prior to the revocation of his bail. And he had no crime, no criminal conviction prior to that or during that time he was out. We also look at recidivism, Judge, whether he's going to commit another crime. And it's clear from the data, both from the DOC and what we know, is that people that are a little bit later in life are less likely to commit crimes. He's 63 now, and if the court were to grant him parole eligibility, he wouldn't even be considered until he was 68. And what we have found from data is that individuals over the age of 60 have a very low recidivism rate. The other thing the court can rely upon is the PSI and the COMPAS score. Every single one is low, except for the serious nature of this offense. Judge, we are asking the court to grant parole eligibility at 20 years. The hurt and pain these two families feel, that Douglas and David feel, we can see it's the same as 25 years ago. We want this family to heal, not have wounds reopened because of continued litigation, but to have this family be able to move forward. And although Mr. Jensen may have written about his boys because his boys are important to him, it's because he wants to be there for them. He wants to answer questions if they have them. He wants to help them if he can help them. He wants to fish with them. He wants to camp with them. He wants to be there for them in the future as a grandparent if he can and if they want him to. It is clear from the PSI that he's low risk. He has a lack of prior record other than this conviction. He's demonstrated performance while on bail and while in the prison system. He's not a risk to reoffend, and he's not a risk in the community. We ask this court to grant Mr. Jensen parole eligibility. It's a serious offense. but after 20 years, we don't believe that depreciates the seriousness of the offense if it was granted. And as the court knows, that would be determined by a parole board after reviewing all the appropriate factors in this case. Judge, Mr. Jensen is going to make a statement to the court, and then if the court has any questions on credit, I would answer those.
Go ahead, Mr. Jensen.
Judge, I ask you to grant parole eligibility and ask you to consider the following. I have always sought to be a productive member of the community. To pay for college, I started a home painting business that employed 10 college students and helped pay for multiple college educations. Upon graduating from college, I became a stockbroker. I was a successful broker and branch manager in the community for 21 years. The securities industry is one of the most heavily regulated. During my career as a stockbroker, I had no client complaints or regulatory issues of any kind. When charged, my securities licenses were suspended. To stay productive and support my family, I started a construction company. It is important for the court to know that while I was in bond, I started and ran that business. We built hundreds of homes, employing up to 36 people, while maintaining a perfect compliance record of the bond conditions, including stopping at the DA's office 3 times a week for 5 years to check in. I did not miss once. I took it seriously. I have been actively involved in local service organizations my entire life, beginning with the Key Club in high school and the Rotary Club after college. While in custody at both the DOC and KCJ, I maintained a good record of behavior and work performance. I have always tried to make a difference and do everything I could the right way. Throughout this case, I have worked to maintain good relationships with the family and my boys, and they have supported me throughout. If released on parole, I have the support of the family with any need, including a place to live and transportation to help me get back on my feet. My parents are 87 and 85, and they need my help. I want to be there to help them and to be able to spend time together while we are able. I have a special relationship with each of the 3 boys and love them dearly. They lost their mom and me during very important years of their lives. David and Doug lost both parents, and Andy lost his dad. All 3 have been through an incredible ordeal over the past 25 years. They each struggled to find their own way, each doing what they needed to do to survive this on their own. It's taken a toll on them. They deserve my help if they want it. I want to be there for them, help them accept the verdict, and help them heal. I know that Doug has expressed anger with me in his current letter to the court. If at any time he wants my help or wants to talk to me, I will be there for him in his time. David and Doug were young when Julie died, and their memories have faded. I'm hoping the time together will help them heal and allow me to help keep family memories alive in a way that a phone call never can. During the time I raised Doug and David on my own, I remember spending time with each of them doing things they loved. David and I would go fishing. We built fishing rods together. We played video games. Doug and I went golfing together, and we fished together. We spent entire summers together. Doug was also accompanying me to job sites and helping me during the summer. The 3 of us would go fishing and camp together all summer. Those memories with the boys are some of the happiest times of my life. When I went to prison, Doug was lost. He was sending me letters at Dodge saying that he was struggling without me. I later learned that Doug began cutting himself when he was about 13 years old. I didn't learn that till years afterwards, but I had just gotten to Dodge when this happened. While in prison, I made every effort to continue to be there for my sons. I have always tried to be there in any way I could while serving my prison time. Doug is hurting. I can tell that from the letter he wrote to the court. I wish I could take that hurt away, but I can't. I love Doug with all my heart. It breaks my heart. It breaks my heart to see him hurting like this. If the court grants me parole, I will be there for Doug if he wants me to be there for him. If he doesn't want a relationship with me, I will respect that. I will always be there for him, whether in custody or out of custody, if his feelings change. This case has gone on forever. It's been 25 years. 9 years for the first trial, 16 years fighting for a new trial, multiple trips through all levels of state and federal courts, 3 judges, 2 trials, and both families have been on this journey through the system with me this entire time. David was 8. He's now 33. Doug was 3. He's now 28. Andy was 3 when I was last sentenced in 2008. He's now 19. It has taken their entire lives. And now with the second verdict, I realize this case needs resolution, where there will be no closure for my boys. Most important, I need to consider the needs of my family. They need to be able to put this behind them and move forward so they can heal. I want to be with them in whatever way they need to help them heal. Please grant parole eligibility so that the family and I can move forward and heal. I can work to understand and find acceptance with the verdict. I can be there for my family who needs me. And please provide me the opportunity to show I can continue to do something positive with my life. Thank you.
Thank you. Are we done then with the defense presentation?
Yeah.
All right, and then is the defense ready for the court to proceed?
Yes.
All right. Well, this was a long trial, and I counted the voir dire days because obviously we were here working. We didn't pick the jury, it took a while. I think it took us up to Wednesday to get a jury. So I have 19 days. I don't have 3 weeks, I have almost 4 weeks. The next comment I want to make, I'm not going to hold it against the defendant that he had his jury trial. Obviously, I cannot consider that. There was a lot of legal issues. Even a defendant in his own statement talked about 3 judges, 2 trials, appeals in the state and the federal courts. This case did take a long time, and as mentioned by the attorneys on both sides, 25 years later, we're finally coming to a resolution, and that's for both families. That's a long time. Sometimes the justice system works slow, but I think eventually it comes to the right decision. Then I have to obviously look at the sentencing factors that were mentioned by the attorneys. Gravity of the offense, the seriousness of the charge. Obviously, everybody agrees it's a serious charge. It's first-degree intentional homicide. There's no higher felony in the state of Wisconsin. The prison sentence has to be life in prison. I can't change that. The only issue for the court is whether the defendant will be eligible for parole. I will note for the record, the pre-sentence report says no parole. The district attorney says no parole. The defense is asking me to grant parole for Mr. Jensen after 20 years, and obviously we have all the requests of the victim's family, again, asking for no parole. I look at the defendant's character, which I have to do. He's well-educated, finished high school here in Kenosha, went on to college, obtained good employment. I think the pre-sentence at one time indicated that he was making over $200,000 a year, very successful. Started another business when he couldn't work as a broker. He does have 3 children. He has no prior criminal record. So obviously those factors the court has to take into consideration. The other advantage that I have on this case is the trial. It's not like it was a plea and I don't hear all the facts. The attorneys tell me what they want me to hear, and then I have to make a determination. But I did have the trial here, and what I'm going to mention here, I'm looking at Mr. Jensen's letter that he read into the record on page 2. He indicates, now with the second verdict, I realize this case needs resolution or there'll be no closure for my 3 boys. He goes on to say, I can work to understand and find acceptance with the verdict. Well, I watched the trial, and I think the evidence was overwhelming that Mr. Jensen was guilty. And the jury came back with a pretty fast verdict. Some of the evidence that I'm going to mention that I think is overwhelming is the defendant that was in jail with Mr. Jensen, and Mr. Jensen wanted to get rid of a witness. And I think the conversation was something to the effect that we need to sit on this witness. And they were plotting this plan not to have this witness available because he gave pretty damaging testimony against Mr. Jensen. And it's Mr. Jensen who's on the jail phone records talking about this. We got to get rid of this witness. Now, why would he do that? We got all the email conversations and the text messages and all the phone conversations that were recorded, talking about poisoning, research, years of records. And I know we were amazed how the computers in those days were so primitive, but all the evidence was there. Mr. Jensen plotting this murder. And then the interview with Pleasant Prairie Police Department, where he was untruthful. He denied having an affair with Kelly. It was on the video that we saw. And then all the computer searches, poison, antifreeze. And then all the penis pictures. I mean, that was rather strange. The torture that he put Julie Jensen through. So there's multiple levels of evidence finding the defendant committed the murder. And then I read all the letters, and the issue for parole is, well, I want to be there for my boys, I want to help them, and I want to help my family. Well, that's a good thing. But what about Julie? She has nothing today. She's dead. She's never going to see her children get married, have successful lives, be there for the holidays. He caused that. He's the one that put that in motion. He says, well, now my boys don't have two parents. Well, guess what? He's the one that murdered Julie to get the ball rolling. You know, and then there's other avenues that people can do if they don't get along with people, and that was mentioned by the state. We're all human beings. Sometimes we just don't get along in a marriage and things don't work out, and other people do things that make us mad, and some people stay married and they're unhappy for the rest of their lives, or they work it out. And Mr. Jensen could have had that opportunity. He could have walked away. If he was having a difficult time with his wife, he could have divorced her, separated, or whatever. But he chose not to do that. What he chose to do is to torture her for a long time. You know, this antifreeze, the theory that somebody would drink that to commit suicide, I don't buy that. That's not a way people commit suicide. It's torture. He was jealous. He was vengeful. He manipulated people. He was a control person over Julie, committed a cruel act. And it happened for a long period of time. As mentioned by the state, it wasn't like somebody made a decision to shoot somebody within 10 seconds or whatever, and it's over, and it's a young person. He's a grown adult, married, and he tortured his wife for a long period of time, for years. You know, we go to funerals, and sometimes you wonder, what do I say to the family at a funeral? Well, sometimes we say, well, at least it was a quick death. The person didn't wake up or had a heart attack and they died right away. At least they didn't suffer. Or if they had a major medical issue and they suffered, sometimes we say, well, at least the suffering's over and they're in a better position right now. Well, in this case, there's no doubt in my mind that Julie Jensen suffered for a long time. And the evidence showed that through the trial. She did not have a good life for a period of time that she was married to Mr. Jensen. The harassment, the antifreeze poisoning, the lack of calling a doctor when she was dying, it was a painful death, and it was all caused by Mr. Jensen. You know, I look at the pictures that I have in front of me. They're pictures of Mr. Jensen with his children, but I still remember Julie Jensen's picture that we had during the trial. She was a loving mother. She loved her children. Both sides agreed to that. And she will never get to see her children grow up because she was murdered by the defendant. So this was planned out for a long time. It was intentional. It was researched with a purpose for evil. He's not getting any parole eligibility. It's too serious of a crime to depreciate. It was too vengeful. I have to consider the need to protect the public from any further criminal activity based on all the factors I just put into the record. No parole, life imprisonment. That is the judgment of the court. He can do the rights of appeal in the back.
I already did it. Thank you, Judge.
Obviously, he's not eligible for the programs.
Take it. Since you got it, I'll take it.